We will now interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for this Good Old Blades micro podcast.
As with, I think, most things, knives and knife making is not void of fads and shifts in desires of certain designs or patterns and handle materials and things like that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about vintage Micarta or Micarta in general, and some other handle materials and things like that. Just talk about like this vintage Micarta craze, especially Westinghouse. For the longest time in knives, Micarta was looked at as a durable, like working man's material. If you wanted to go with more premium materials, you went with mother of pearl, sandbar stag. You went with something like desert ironwood, and mammoth ivory. Some of these things like Usik and whatnot too. And over time, as those supplies have kind of dried up, as it were, you see a shift to other materials that are plentiful. There are lots of knife makers that would put Micarta on their knives, but again, they were just utilitarian materials. They were not anything great, and they did not command a larger price point because of that. If you wanted a working man's knife, maybe you put Micarta on it. At Sandbar Stag, the export of it from India had been heavily restricted. Mother of pearl slowly had gone the way of the dodo because the large shells that produced it were becoming more and more rare, especially as other industries utilized a lot of the surplus and everything that had been there. So overfishing or over collecting had caused problems too. Desert ironwood, a lot of the old growth had been used up, and you don't see an exceptional amount of the really high quality dark chatoyant burl that you used to, especially in the 70s through the 90s. A lot of that has dried up. So something to understand about vintage Micartas is that the fibers that are used in phenolic resin, so a formaldehyde-based resin, are they differ. You basically have three major types. You have paper, canvas, and linen. And there were a lot of industrial purposes for Micarta in the early days, thinking as far back as probably the 1920s or 30s. And in addition with that, some of the fibers were also asbestos. So a lot of Micarta was used for industrial purposes, and so like flame resistance or heat resistance was a large deal. And you can see some early forms of phenolic resin Micarta in aircrafts and electrical components and circuit boards and large breaker systems and things like that. And it was all used to buffer electricity and heat and things. Westinghouse, I believe in the late 40s, early 50s, approximately, produced Micarta, but found other purposes in household goods, like the veneering for furniture and trays and things like that. So they basically repurposed the industrial side of their product for home use and everything and decor. And a lot of what you see in the desirable form of Micarta now really comes from this marketing and use that comes from Westinghouse primarily. So it it's not a surprise, at least, that the most desirable micarta to use and what is now some of the most valuable, and I'm using air quotes there, valuable, is Westinghouse, and specifically paper micartas. So like ivorite. Ivorite, with the 1970s Mammalian Act ban, paper micarta and specifically ivorite kind of gave an ivory type material that knife makers could use as a replacement for ivory, where restrictions and things like that applied. And as it ages, it turns into most likely a cream colored, and that patina is something that's very desirable. In the knife industry now, things like patina and age and accent is something that knife users and collectors and whatnot like, because the knife starts out new, but then they impart the patina through use and time, and it's something that it's very unique to the user or the collector. Those materials don't stay static and looking the same for very long. They're always patinaing and changing with the environment, basically. What you see in cost of certain types of micartas, especially the vintage micartas, really comes from a supply and demand perspective. Now, new micartas do not have the same phenolic resin component to it, so you will find that in a lot of cases, newer resins are a little bit more gummy. They don't hold the same kind of sheen that the old ones did, and they're not as dense. And there are lots of manufacturers out there that are producing good micarta alternatives that are kind of meeting some of the behavioral traits of the vintage stuff, but it's just really not exactly the same. So like maybe 6-7 years ago, approximately, maybe a little bit shorter time, there was a few people that would buy up most of the stock of Westinghouse materials as it became available and as the trend started to shift, and artificially inflated the market and the price. So you have guys who buy up entire slabs or whatever of ivorite or paper micarta from Westinghouse, and if it has stickers that denote its authenticity, then they jack the price up. And it used to be, maybe you could get a 3/16 set of scales for like, I don't know, $8. Even back in the 90s, not too hard. Even in the 2000s, you could find something for $20-$30. Not a big deal. It's only really within like the last 5 or so years, approximately, that you see these astronomical prices, like $300, $400, $500 for a 3/16 to a 1/4 inch scale set, and up into more than $1,000 for the rarer like reds, blues, and greens in Westinghouse. And you also will see a lot of people that say things are Westinghouse for the provenance component, but really there's no way to authenticate that. Now, it's one of those things where there were a lot of manufacturers of different types of micarta. Westinghouse happens to be one of them. But there is also a lot out there that was never made in a Westinghouse facility. It doesn't have the same components of Westinghouse, and so on and so forth. So I think probably the point to remember is that Westinghouse micarta, it's not garbage, but it's not $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 for a scale set type of material. It comes completely from an artificial inflated market, kind of like De Beers does with diamonds. I'm not going to say it's theft, because it is supply and demand. It's finite. There's none being made, and there's not a lot of places where you can find it. Maybe they're sitting in some old timers, scale sets or whatever. Some people don't care about it. But when people get a hold of it who, think that there's a value to it, they end up, charging an exceptional amount. Kind of one thing about that is that, there's lots of applications where that kind of micarta, it really hits a spot on a pattern aesthetic or whatever. And it would be nice to be able to have access to it at times. But yeah, you can't, because people are hoarding collections of it. And when they do release it, they're asking astronomical prices. And to me, I don't know. Like, there's lots of other materials out there. There's lots of other micarta type products. There's other natural materials and things that, to be honest with you, I think look better. There's new canvas and linen micartas. There's vintage micartas that are not authenticated, Westinghouse, and potentially from other manufacturers. And all of those, they look good. They do the job, and you can't say anything bad about it. But I really hesitate to think that the Westinghouse micarta that I have, for instance, is worth $400 or $500. Point being, kind of, is that as a knife maker, even though you can charge higher prices as you develop your skill set and your notoriety and everything, you can charge more. If you think about a scale set, you have to charge at least the replacement or the fair market value for a piece of something that you're putting on handles and Damascus and things like that. Like, it's whatever it costs or however you can get it. That's kind of how rare it is. And so you change a knife that maybe it costs you $100 to make something with material. $60 set of nice scales. Maybe $30, $40 in metal and the heat treating costs and Corby fasteners or pins or things like that. Maybe you include a sheath in the price, but you slap on a $400 piece of scales and you have to immediately jack that price up $400+. So a knife that might have cost $500 now costs $900 to $1,000 just by virtue of the handle material. And I think that's where it's difficult for some knife makers because the inflation has limited the ability for a lot of makers to have access to those materials, even though they're practically worthless in terms of their material quality. Like, it's no different than the quality or material aesthetic of like Rich Light or a new paper micarta, but it has this desire in the industry, and it has to be authentic Westie, and because it's that, it costs more. I would not get too hung up on that. If knife handle suppliers or private collectors or whatever are trying to charge an astronomical amount for micarta, it will solve itself, because eventually people are going to move on to something else. The fad is going to be over, and instead of having that available as an option at the high astronomical prices that are being charged now, nobody will want to pay for it. So those supplies will be largely defunct. I think that we're probably on the verge of that. It's been a good run. People do like micarta. Less people are willing to pay the high prices. And so eventually, people are going to move on to the other things that are available. And then that market is going to have a bubble, and all these people who are sitting on their quote unquote hordes of materials will likely lose an exceptional amount of value because of the greed associated with it. So, I mean, I can't fault a person for selling something at a fair price, based on demand and everything. But to artificially limit the supplies of availability and whatnot because you bought it low and you want to sell it extraordinarily high, if a bubble occurs, I will not be too upset over it. Mostly because I would never charge those type of prices for the Westinghouse that I have. Maybe a reasonable price like $150, $200 for a scale set to put it on a knife, just because that's kind of somewhere in the middle. but I likely would just be depleting my stock and never be able to replace it. So once it's gone, it's gone. So those type of material ethics and treating your customers right based on the fact that not everybody has an extra $500 to $1,000 to dump into a knife for the handle material itself. It's kind of one of those things. Kind of somewhere where I draw the line is like antique ivory, mammoth ivory, some exceptional like exhibition style sandbar stags. Like those are so incredibly hard to find and so finite that really each piece is very unique. And I don't know, it's just like you're never going to find it again. Westinghouse is really one of those things where it's more that people have it, and a few people have larger supplies of it, and they jack the prices up artificially. So, just buyer beware. Not everybody's going to be able to afford it, and it's a self-solving problem. The bubble will pop. People move on to other things. Collectors will want other things, and then you might find that those people who hold on to them, their assets depreciate significantly, and then they end up selling it because they move on to something else too. So, don't get too hung up on it. There are avenues out there to buy less expensive Westinghouse and other things from people who are private collectors of it and just want it to go in the hands of makers and be used for customers. So you can kind of find it around, but it's getting pretty hard. And maybe if your customer really wants it, then just know kind of what you're looking at price wise. But again, there's a lot of other materials out there that I think are as nice, probably superior to that. Those type of Westinghouse materials or whatever, because there's really only a few, and they get a lot of notoriety. But again, they'll go the way of the dodo, like Usik. Nobody really uses Usik anymore. Except on representing the older knife makers or whatever. But I hope that helps. Really just to think about the materials choices that you're offering to your customers. Think about the maximum amount that you're willing to pay for it, and also know that there are a ton of options out there that are not part of this artificially inflated and super hyped industry that is vintage Micarta.